Welcome to Candid Conversations on the web at one-on-one-candidconversations.blogspot.com and here on YouTube. Today's Candid Comment Video Edition features Cliff Tour, who is sharing his thoughts about Happy Days. The show ran for 11 seasons and won several awards, including one Emmy. The show is set in the 50s in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Here's some interesting and true facts about this show. The show features a middle-class family, the Cunninghams, Richie, Joanie, Howard, and Marion. The main thrust of the show is the story of Richie Cunningham, a teenager growing up in the 50s. The show's pilot aired on Love American Style, often seen as a place where show pilots that were flops would go to die. The pilot aired there because it did not sell well. The story centered around Richie and family who just got a TV, the first in the neighborhood, and Richie's plot to get a date thinking the TV would be a chick magnet. Oddly enough, the show was supposed to be set in the 20s and 30s, but Gary Marshall nixed that idea, stating he had no clue about the era and was more equipped to write about life in the 50s. Another interesting fact is Bill Haley, the writer and singer of Rock Around the Clock, and his connection to the show. He rewrote the tune specifically for the show. The original version aired during the first season. The newer version for the show was used for seasons 2 and 3. The Fonz was only supposed to be a bit character, only supposed to appear on a few episodes, but became a favorite of fans, so the character and Henry Winkler, who played him, stuck around for pretty much the entire 11 years. Patsy Weber and Richie Cunningham are real people that Gary Marshall echoed the characters in the show on. The shark jump, that famous moment where the show started to lose its credibility, was not a thing. The Fonz never really jumped it. It was a fake, and Henry Winkler, wearing a special leather jacket, did do the stunt, just not with a real shark. And interestingly enough, Henry Winkler was not a fan of motorcycles. All the scenes of him riding one are of him on the bike, but it's pulled by a trailer. He never actually rides them in the normal manner one would. Now here is Cliff with his commentary on Happy Days here on Candid Conversations, Candid Comment, the video edition.
Hi there, welcome to Candid Conversations on YouTube, and of course on our blog at one-on-one-candidconversations.blogspot.com. And in the introduction you heard a little bit about some of the things that basically made a show that was around for 11 years called Happy Days what it was. It was a really interesting show, and it had quite a genesis, as noted in the introduction. The show basically had a pilot featuring the family with a TV and Richie trying to score a date. Didn't quite work out for him, but at the end of the day, the show did work out itself. So Ron Howard and gang got into the history book, so to speak, and the icon, lexicon, whatever you want to call it, of our TV watching history. So Happy Days was around for a long period of time. It actually featured really the story of Richard Cunningham's coming of age, growing up as a teenager, and then going into college and finally into the world as a soldier first and foremost, and then eventually going out to California after getting a chance to do some work as a writer, a scriptwriter, which is ironic because it's what he really wanted to do in real life. That was basically the show. So the show started in the 50s, ended up ending in the late 60s. And of course, there's a lot of transition and change. I never followed all 11 seasons, but I do have to say I did follow some of the earlier seasons. I remember the first time I actually saw the show. It was basically back in around, I would say, in the early 70s for sure, 72, 73, somewhere in there. I remember that show very well. And I remember asking my mom, who grew up in the 50s, what it was like. And she said, yeah, it was pretty accurate. The show did depict the 50s pretty closely. So Gary Marshall did get it right. Basically, the show featured a middle-class family in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, basically going through life. And mainly the main character, the main star, main person that they were focusing on is Richard Cunningham. He's the one that they're drilling in on in this show because, after all, it's his growing up. He's becoming a young man, going through high school, into college, eventually into the world, and living his life and having all kinds of adventures. Um, it was really an interesting show, but now looking back on it, there are some things that I've seen as an adult, and I look at this show and I go, "Yeah, it wasn't that didn't jive a lot with what reality really is." In the first one or two seasons, yeah, I think it did. In the third and fourth, stuck around to its theme, but eventually it started getting kind of predictable. And really, what was happening with the show is that it became more about Arthur Fonzarelli, not Richie. Henry Winkler, great guy, don't get me wrong, really took over what was supposed to be the story of Richard Cunningham. And it was more about the Fonz and his antics and how he was saving the day all the time and doing all kinds of crazy things that got the show attention, but also kind of drew away from what the real main story was, which is basically this young man growing up. Um, and that's basically kind of sad because it was really a funny show, but it was also meant to really showcase what a young teenager's life is really about, growing up in that era of time. And in the middle, or I don't know what it was, season six, seven, or eight, somewhere in there, but at one point, there's a show that featured Arthur Fonzarelli doing something in California that is called Jumping the Shark. What happened was they went to California, and sure enough, the ponds, there's the daredevil deed, if you will. Does the daredevil deed? That's what I meant to say. Does the daredevil deed, and jumps over a shark. Now, as it's pointed out in the introduction, that didn't really happen. He never actually jumped a real shark. It was a fake, and the reason being obviously for safety. They weren't going to risk Henry Winkler's life. But the other interesting thing about Henry Winkler was that he was actually quite skilled in water skiing. So he was able to do the stunt himself safely, and it worked out quite well. So that was cool. But what was not so cool was what it did to the show. It basically started to take away from the credibility because it basically culminated in the fact that the Fonz could not do anything wrong. There was no way he could fail. He could always basically win, whether it was a fight, whether it was getting girls, whatever it was. He never he never failed, and that kind of took away from what the show was really supposed to be. As I mentioned before, it was supposed to be about a young man growing up in the 50s and moving through the different stages of life from a teenager to a young man in college to an adult. And what really happened was this character, Arthur Banzarelli, played by Henry Winkler, became more of the central character of the show. And for a while, it was kind of funny and interesting and different. But at the end of the day, it really became, quite frankly, quite stupid because here's this guy who could go up to a jukebox and go boom, and it would play music, and then boom again, and it would stop playing music. Could do this and get girls. But trust me, I have not tried hitting a jukebox. I don't think I would do well to hit one, and basically uh, probably I would get kicked out. So I'm not going to go around punching jukeboxes. See if they play music. That doesn't work. You put the quarter in or you do whatever. That's not going to work out too well if I do the other thing. So it was unrealistic in that regard because there's no way anybody could really truly do that. Maybe you might one time get lucky and smack a jukebox and it will play. But generally speaking, no, it's not going to happen. It's just unrealistic. The other aspect of this, of course, is the girls. Fonzarelli always got the girl. Um, and really, in all honesty, it was, if you think about it, it was really, I don't know, I can't say rapey. I can't use that word. Some might say it was. I don't know. but misogynistic maybe. But it was certainly definitely a show that was very, particularly for this character, very male centric because he always got the girl. Um, if I were to snap my fingers on a girl, particularly my own wife, I probably would get slapped, and rightly so. I mean, come on, I'm not going to do that. So it just doesn't make sense for this whole character to be able to do those things. It even got to the point where there was one episode where Arthur Panzarelli is in the forest in a sleeping bag, and he snapped his fingers. All the birds and the other animals go quiet. Now, come on, it's not realistic. No way could anybody really do this. I think Gary Marshall really took that show and let unreality seep in to it, and it just didn't make sense. But could also have been the studio people too. Let's face it, they were looking to make a buck, and they were willing to give whatever the audience was looking for. So if the audience wanted unrealistic, okay, we'll give them unrealistic. But in true term, in true fashion, what that show really was, in the truest terms of its existence, was at the end of the day a show that just no longer really made sense. So I think what happened at the end when Joanie finally gets married to Chachi was good. They finally just ended it, and on a good note too, because people still loved the show, but it wasn't as credible as it once was when it finally did go off the air. So having said all of that, I think we have to realize something about shows and how long they go. Some shows can really last a period of time, a long period of time at that, and do extremely well. Some of the shows that I can think of that are like that are the CSI series, the SVU, and other Law and Order series have done very well. Chicago Fire, Med, and also, of course, and Chicago PD have done well because the storylines are quite close to realistic. They make sense. So it's definitely going to stick. Same with Blue Bloods, but eventually that show's going to end too. But what happened with with Happy Days is it just became unrealistic, and it couldn't really hold water anymore after so many years. I'm surprised it even lasted the 11 years that it did. So kudos to them. It did get one Emmy award, which is awesome. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this show, from a standpoint of enjoyment, I have to admit I enjoyed it. I mean, come on, let's face it. For me, it was Joanie Aaron Morin was really who I was looking to see every week because she was cute. There's no doubt about it, especially when she twirled her baton and spun around. That little skirt definitely caught the eye. But the the crux of the show, basically the gist of this, the whole thing, at the end of the day, just it didn't wash anymore, and I stopped watching it after a while because I just realized it didn't make sense to me. And then looking back on it, now I understood why it didn't make sense because the Fonz always rescued people. He always won the fight. He always won the girl, and he always was right. And that's just not really realistic or true in society at all. So I guess my take on and my point on this particular show is that if you want a good laugh, if you want a good bit of comedy, if you want some family friendly fun, this is a show which is still in syndication, by the way. And also, if you have one of those Roku boxes or one of those boxes that you get satellite TV on, IPTV, you can actually find this show and watch it. And yeah, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But for me, it it is as an adult. mm, It's interesting, but my takeaway on it at this point in my age, at this age that I'm at now, is that yeah, first couple of seasons were great. After that, it was just downhill, and particularly once the shark episode happened, it was like game over, done. Hence the term "jumping the shark." When you hear that expression, it means that essentially the show, the person, the idea has lost its credibility. And that's what happened. I think that's really truly what was the death knell. Never mind the show's cast, some of the originals leaving. It was just that kind of thing that happened. It just sort of waxed wane because the reality wasn't there. It wasn't didn't make sense anymore. Um, and that's the way it went. So there's my thinking on Happy Days. Like I said, if you like family friendly comedy, if you like the idea of you know this very neutral kind of comedy that was Happy Days, it's your thing. The only thing I will say that was a negative thing from the standpoint, or is a negative thing from the standpoint of where we are today versus then, was really the misogyny that was there, or the kind of attitudes toward women that were there, wasn't really that great. As I pointed out, the Fonz being able to snap his fingers and get a girl all the time, it's not real. So that's it. That's my take on all of this. I hope that you continue to come back and see us here at Candid Conversations. If you want to do a candid conversation, by the way, you're welcome to do so. You can email me at candidconversations@hotmail.com, and I'll happily have you jump in and do one. You can do it either via email or through Zoom. And of course, we featured it here on YouTube, and of course also on our blog at 101candidconversations.blogspot.com. I'm Cliff Tour. Thanks again for watching this video. Please hit the like button, subscribe, and share this particular video. We hope that we'll see more and more growth as the channel continues on its merry way. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you in the next one.